Welcome back to Sports Class with Dr. K. For the last few episodes, we've been talking about that documentary, The Last Dance, like all sports fans around the country. Now, as I've watched that documentary, it occurred to me how many great NBA players didn't win championships because Michael Jordan and the Bulls were just blocking their way. You think about Karl Malone, John Stockton, Patrick Ewing, and Charles Barkley, among many others. So we're going to spend this episode today talking about great players in various sports who never won a championship. Before we get to that though, let me answer the trivia question from the previous episode. So in our episode on multi-sport athletes, I asked, one of the athletes discussed in that episode had a brother who was also a great athlete and actually won a silver medal in the 200 meters at the Olympics. The answer was Mac Robinson, who's the brother of Jackie Robinson and won the silver medal in the 200 in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. All right, now let's get to some great athletes who never won a championship. So I'm going to start with a foursome, kind of. The Buffalo Bills teams of the late 1980s and early 90s were one of the greatest football teams of all time. They made it to 4 consecutive Super Bowls, but didn't win any of them. So a whole bunch of great players on those teams never won a title. We're talking about wide receiver Andre Reed, running back Thurman Thomas, defensive end Bruce Smith, and quarterback Jim Kelly. Now, Bruce Smith might be the best of the bunch. He's certainly one of the greatest defensive ends ever, but quarterback Jim Kelly is one of those quarterbacks who would probably be much higher on our list of the all-time greats if he had won even one of those Super Bowls. So how about a twofer next? When we think about some of the great teams that Michael Jordan and those Bulls defeated, the Utah Jazz of that era are right at the top, and they were led by a pair of Hall of Fame greats in John Stockton and Karl Malone. Now, Karl Malone may be the more accomplished of the two players. When he retired, he was the second leading scorer in NBA history. He led his teams to the playoffs all 19 years of his career, but of course never won. Twice his teams made it to the finals and lost to the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. In the last year of his career, Karl Malone jumped to the LA Lakers and played with a loaded team that actually made the NBA Finals but lost to the Detroit Pistons in the finals. John Stockton, another all-time great. He's the all-time leader in steals and assists in the NBA and had a great career in the postseason as well. But like Karl Malone, his teams never won the NBA title, and the 2 times he made the finals, they lost to Michael Jordan and the Bulls. Let's talk about 2 of Major League Baseball's all-time greats, Ernie Banks, Mr. Cobb, and Ted Williams, Teddy Ballgame. Those 2 guys played a combined 38 years in the majors for 2 of Major League Baseball's great franchises. But those teams were mired in the midst of what were thought to be curses that kept them from winning the title for many decades on end. For Ernie Banks and the Cubs, it was the curse of the Billy Goat, which meant the Cubs didn't win a World Series for 71 years. Many of those years, Ernie Banks was leading that team. Banks was a good enough player to be named MVP of the league twice, but his teams never came close to winning a World Series. And in fact, over his career, the Cubs finished a collective 452.5 games out of first place. Now for Ted Williams, it was the Red Sox, who were locked in the middle of the curse of the Bambino. They didn't win a World Series for 86 years, and Ted Williams played right in the middle of that streak. Now, of course, he's thought to have one of the greatest swings in Major League history. He's the last hitter to hit over 400 for the season. He was a 19-time All-Star and 2-time MVP, but he only made the World Series 1 time, and his team didn't win. Okay, how about a couple more NBA all-time greats that had the misfortune of playing their careers at the peak of the Jordan era or the Bird Magic era right before it? Of course, Charles Barkley comes to mind. He was a great player and 11-time All-Star, but his teams only made the finals 1 time, and they lost to the Bulls in those finals. Now, 2 others are Patrick Ewing and Dominique Wilkins. Dominique, one of the NBA's all-time greats. When he finished his career, he was in the top 10 all-time in NBA scoring. And for a stretch at the end of the 80s and early 90s, his Atlanta Hawks teams were one of the elite teams in the NBA. But they never broke through to win a championship. And Patrick Ewing, who played for the New York Knicks in that same era. And some of those teams were among the great in the NBA in the late 80s and early 90s. But they never broke through to win a title. The only time Patrick Ewing played in the finals came in 1994 when Michael Jordan was retired playing baseball, and they lost to the Houston Rockets in 7 games. Okay, so let's get to our top 4 greatest players to never win a title. Well, when you mention that phrase, who comes to mind immediately? It's got to be Dan Marino, right? He's probably the most famous player who never won a title. He also famously played in the Super Bowl in his 2nd season, but never made it back again after that. Now, he had a slew of records in the NFL. When he retired, he held 29 all-time records. But his teams, after that first attempt at the Super Bowl, never even made it back. Now, in Major League Baseball, the greatest player to never win a championship might just be Barry Bonds. He might be the greatest player of all time, period. In 22 seasons, Barry Bonds hit the most home runs of any player, 762. And he's the only player to win 7 MVP awards. But he famously struggled in the postseason prior to his only appearance in the World Series, which came in 2002. Now, he played great in that World Series. He hit 4 home runs and actually was walked 20 times by the Angels. But his team lost in 7 games. Now, another of the all-time greats without a title is Barry Sanders. Sanders played his entire career with the Detroit Lions on mostly terrible teams. If you watch his highlight clips, they're filled with clips of the offensive line breaking down and Barry Sanders making incredible saves just to make any gain at all. Barry made 10 Pro Bowls in his career, but the closest he came to a title was in 1991 when they lost in the NFC Championship game. All right, and number 1 on our list, maybe the greatest player ever without a title, is Ty Cobb. Now, Ty Cobb is regarded as perhaps the greatest hitter of all time. He has the highest lifetime batting average ever at .367. He was also one of the first members of the Hall of Fame inducted in 1936. But despite his individual greatness, the Detroit Tigers were never a very good team during his career. It was only in a 3-year stretch from 1907 to 1909 that the Tigers made the World Series each year, but they lost every time, meaning that Ty Cobb is one of the all-time greatest players to never win a title. So there you have it, the greatest players of all time to never win a title. Now, before we depart, let me leave you with a trivia question for this episode. Name the only player in Major League Baseball history to have 200 hits in 10 consecutive seasons. And I'll give you a little hint, he never won a title either. I'll give you the answer in the next episode. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.